Okay, today we are on, let's see here, I think we're caught up to December 19th, yes. Okay, there's a dog in here, so if you hear something, that's what that is. December 19th, first flight. Higher and higher Winston and Leighton climbed. The air was crisp and clear and freezing cold, and the wind whipping around Winston made his eyes water, but his heart sore. The flight was more than a little wobbly at first. It took Leighton quite a while to get his limbs going in the right direction and all working at the same time. Great foggy clouds of breath bloomed in front of the little reindeer's nose with the effort as his legs galloped through the sky. Carefully, Winston crept closer to his new friend's ears and called and hollered encouragement over the noise of the air streaming by them. The pair flew through the curtains of clouds and patches of tumbling snow, but for the most part, the sky was open and vast. The higher Leighton flew, the colder it got. In the distance, stars shone. The moon glowed and the northern lights danced in waves in front of them. At one point, Winston thought he saw a shooting star. It was definitely something hurtling through the sky at speed, but he was too busy watching for the North Star to pay it much attention. Leighton's grandma had said the lullaby mentioned it, and he was sure it would take them to the North Pole and hopefully straight to Winston's mum. A sudden shiver of cold air made Winston's whiskers tingle, snapping him from his thoughts. He looked about, but everything was now a jumble of snowflakes and thick clouds. The clear night sky had disappeared, and, Winston realized, so had the North Star. "We've hit a snowstorm!" shouted Leighton over the wind. "It's going to be a bit bumpy." As if on cue, the wind buffeted against the little reindeer, and on his back Winston had to grip on for dear life. "Do you know where we are?" called Winston. "No," said Leighton. Then, "Yes, no, I'm not sure." "What do you mean?" cried Winston. "Well, I don't know where I am, but I think my nose does," shouted Leighton. Winston looked at Leighton's snout. It was still glowing, illuminating a small patch of clouds around them, but now it was also flashing. "And it seems to be telling my legs where to go," continued Leighton excitedly. Winston watched in amazement as Leighton's nose swung to the side, pulling his whole body with him. Beneath him, the reindeer's legs pulled powerfully through the clouds and then suddenly burst through them. "I think we're about to land," cried Leighton. Winston had only enough time to tighten his paws. I'll show you this part. Winston only had just time to tighten his paws around Leighton's fur before, wallop, they hit the ground, tumbling over and over themselves in thick powdery snow. Winston sat up and cleared the ice from his eyelashes. He gasped. In front of them was a large, old, snow-covered house, and in a window, a light was flickering. And there's Winston looking at it. And it has bows all over the place. This is the activity. Make a snowman tea light ornament. Okay. December 20th. Lost. "Where are we?" whispered Leighton, picking himself up and shaking off the thick coat of snow his bumpy landing had dressed him in. "I don't know," said Winston. Then he shook his head. No, that wasn't quite right. Although he was sure he hadn't been in this place before, he seemed to know exactly where he was. "Actually, I do know," he continued excitedly. "This is Mince Pie House. This is the home of Father Christmas." Leighton's eyes widened as he looked around. "Those must be the reindeer stables," he said, nodding his little antlers in the direction of the wooden building covered thickly in snow, "where the famous flying reindeer live." His tail wagged excitedly, and Winston could see that his friend was desperate to go and investigate. "Go on," he said. I'm going to go in there. Winston pointed at the house. Leighton galloped off, and Winston was left all alone. He was feeling a bit peculiar. After travelling all this way, all those miles, was his mum on the other side of the door? He felt excited and nervous all at the same time. But then he realized that another strange sensation was jingling through his little body. It was as if he wasn't quite in control of himself. He looked down in surprise to see his feet walking softly over the snow toward the entrance. Then he watched in a daze as his paw lifted, and he hammered on the thick wooden front door. So he was knocking on it. He seemed to be doing everything automatically, as if something else was directing him. Was it magic? No one answered. Winston tried again, but the wind was howling around the building, and he was very small, so his tiny knocks were scratched away by the blizzard. He looked around for another way in and spotted a gap under the door. Just where I knew it would be, he thought, amazed. With a heave and a pop, Winston was soon inside. It was warm in the hallway, so toasty after Winston's midnight dash through the snowy night sky. And although it was dimly lit, with the lights turned down low, the place was cheerful and cozy. Winston found himself padding down the corridor, running a paw against the walls. The wallpaper was an intricate design of holly leaves and berries and ribbons and little parcels. I've seen this before, he whispered. Soon Winston came to a door which opened out into an enormous workshop. The space seemed too big to fit into the house he looked at from the outside, and once again Winston wondered if there was magic at work in this place. Excuse me. Everywhere he looked, there were large high desks with teetering stools beside them. Shelves stacked with boxes reached high up into the ceiling, and tall, wobbly-looking ladders were balancing precariously here and there. The room was, Winston had to admit, very untidy. Spools of ribbons had unraveled all over the place, and the floor was littered with tiny snippings of wrapping paper. It was also completely empty. Winston frowned. He didn't know how he knew, but he was sure this wasn't right. This room should be bustling, he said. And squinting, he allowed his mind to fill it with imaginary helpers, all busying about and excited. Yes, that's exactly what would have been happening here. He opened his eyes fully and rubbed his nose thoughtfully. Where were they all? Excuse me. Oliver Gianfrido, get out of here. He decided to look for clues and scamper about, not really knowing what he was searching for. Then he spotted something interesting. On one of the desks was a very important-looking clipboard. I'm going to show it to you. All right. On one of the desks was a very important-looking clipboard that held a sheet of paper. It was a calendar showing all the days in December. Most of the dates were crossed off with an X, but they stopped on the box marked the 24th. Winston gasped, and he started to feel a bit hot about the ears. Today is Christmas Eve, he squeaked. And you see it's circled right there. He's got to get back to Oliver. He suddenly understood why the place was empty, so empty and quiet. All the busy helpers who should have been there were tucked up in bed. All the presents for Father Christmas's sleigh were packed up and ready to be delivered. Their work was finished. Winston sat down with a flump. His whiskers drooped. I'm too late, he thought. I've come all this way looking for an answer, and I'm too late. No one is here who can help me, and I'm miles and miles and miles away from Oliver. I promised I'd be back for Christmas, and I won't be. Winston's eyes began to prickle. He was a very brave mouse, but right at that moment, he didn't feel brave at all. What am I going to do? He said to himself, his little voice echoing around the enormous empty room. He'd been so sure that he was on the right track to solve his mystery. Everything was pointing to this place, and he still had that strange feeling of knowing where he was, or at least half remembering it, and yet all the clues didn't make sense. This room didn't smell of any of the things he remembered. There were wafts of sticky tape and wrapping paper here, instead of cooking smells and peppermint. Winston's tail quivered with worry. On the rest of his adventures, he had always found a new friend who had helped him on his way. But now there was nobody. He felt very tired and lost and tiny. He realized then that he was shivering, although it wasn't cold in the workshop. A little draft was whispering into the room from somewhere nearby, and it was making his fur dance. He found himself drying his eyes with his scarf as once again that feeling of being led by something invisible overtook him. He stood up and allowed his feet to lead him toward where the draft was coming from. There was another door. Here's the door. His mum's voice came to him then, singing a lullaby. His whiskers wobbled and his nose twitched as he smelled something on the breeze coming from the next room. It was the exact warm, gingery, biscuity smell he had remembered. And then, more faintly, but still there, peppermint. "I am in the right place," Winston whispered. He hardly dared to believe it. Was his mum just on the other side of the door? And so, with his heart leaping, with anticipation and his whiskers dancing, Winston clambered under the door. There he is, clambering. Okay, and the next activity is to make Christmas bunting out of wrapping paper. All right. And then Daddy is going to read you the one for tonight.